Morning.
Morning.
Please be seated. Forgot about that part. Just made you all stand. I'm sure it has to be 6 months ago that Columba asked me if I was interested in giving the sermon today. And I don't know about you, but when things are that far away, you just kind of say, oh yeah, sure, no problem, I'll do it. And then when that happens to me, I sort of put it on the shelf, and there's 1,000 things in between that day and this one. So you don't really think about it. And then that shelf has a little bit of a tilt on it. And as time goes by and the day gets closer, the thing starts to slide to the front of the shelf. And then all of a sudden, about 2 weeks ago, Columba wrote me and said, hey, don't forget, you're going to be preaching in a couple of weeks. And the thing fell right off the shelf. And I was like, oh, okay, now I have to deal with this. He was kind enough to send the readings and all of this analysis from various academic sources. And it was all very interesting and in-depth, and most of it was about the beggar, Bartimaeus, and the fact that he was named. Lots of beggars, I suppose, in the other Gospels are not, and this, for some reason, he was. Also that he threw off his cloak. That was very impactful to many scholars and what that meant. I am not a biblical scholar. That should come as a surprise to no one. And that all felt really academic and kind of dry, so I thought we would just kind of go in a whole different direction. Just remember, if you don't like some or part of this, we have Columba to blame. So I guess before we talk about the gospel, I sort of wanted to go way back to the beginning and think about God's relationship to us in the first part of the Bible, in the Old Testament. I'm not really a fan of the Old Testament very much. I understand, or I guess I think I understand the purpose, and that it sets a context for us for the New Testament. But as a set of standalone stories, it's difficult for me to sort of absorb and connect with. There's lots of strange stuff that goes on, lots of mystical stories. There's also lots of begatting and lots of violence. There's genocide in the Old Testament. It's a lot. And there's lots of these really awful tests of faith. Job had a lifetime test of faith. And there was one that always comes to my mind, and it's the story of Abraham and Isaac. And I'm sure everyone remembers it, but if you don't, the short version is God comes to Abraham and says, I need you to take your only son, the thing that you love most in the world, and I'm going to tell you when and where, and I want you to take your son up to this mountain, and I want you to slaughter him and burn him for me as an offering. Slaughter and burn. And Abraham's ready to do it. That's, I guess, a test of faith. I'm not sure I would be able to do that. And even while they're walking up to the top of the mountain, Isaac says, hey, Dad, where's the animal that we're going to sacrifice? And Abraham simply says, rather cryptically, God will provide. To be fair, God does call it off at the last second. I mean, there's Isaac bound, and he's got the knife over him, and he's ready to go. And the angel comes down and says, wait. But still, that seems like the God of the Old Testament needs a lot of validation and a lot of praise and a lot of testament to his greatness. And if you don't do it, then lots of bad things happen. I always wondered to myself what the walk home was like for Abraham and Isaac. How'd that conversation go? Was Abraham like, hey, son, I'm really sorry about that whole sacrifice thing, but you understand, right? And how many times after that Isaac went off with his dad anywhere? Abraham was like, hey, I'm going to the market. You want to go? Isaac like, no, I'm good. I'll just stay here. You don't have any knives on you, do you? So in thinking about those stories and thinking about what they reveal about God and the supremacy of his power, how he exercised it depending on his mood and the particular target and where in God's favor that target was, the need to be satisfied and worshipped and revered. I was wondering if this was where the term God complex came from. And I don't know if you know what a God complex is, but it's not an official sort of psychiatric diagnosis, but there was a psychoanalyst in the 20th century, his name was Ernst Jones, and he coined this phrase. And it describes a type of neurosis where a person, put simply, believes they're God. They believe they're infallible, mistakes are impossible for them. They have a difficult time empathizing with others' feelings or what they're going through are not really that important to them. And they're not bound by our rules. And really, I think most importantly, everyone around them must provide constant validation and deference to them, or the reaction can be somewhat explosive. A person with a God complex lashes out when they're threatened or questioned. And that sort of felt like the God of the Old Testament to me a little bit. That's better. It's very small. We'll revisit that concept in a second. So let's go forward to today's gospel. Jesus and the crowd are leaving Jericho. They're heading to Jerusalem, and this is kind of an important time because the story of Jesus' mortal life is sort of about to unwind. We're getting to the end. This is Jerusalem, before Holy Week, before he comes in triumph and is sacrificed. And Jesus knows. He knows what's going to happen. He knows he has far fewer steps ahead than he does behind. We all sort of are on this walk in our lives, right? We start in one place when we're born, and then there's a place, a Jerusalem for us all. Fortunately, we don't know how many more steps we have, but at some point we kind of know that we've tipped over that halfway mark, and there's fewer ahead than behind. But Jesus knew that what was waiting for him there was torture and death. And I can't imagine what was going through his head as he's walking on this road, and there's all this kind of cacophony that's around him, that's sort of always around him, right? There's this crowd that moves with him, and they're all talking about their own things, and they're constantly asking him to teach and answer questions and justify this and prove that and do this next thing. And that must have just been draining for him. The knowledge that what he's approaching and the fear of that, and also this constant drain of energy of people eating, questioning, talking. It must have been very sad for him. So it's within this context that we meet Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, obviously. And as the circus that surrounds Jesus is moving by, he is told that it is Jesus that's coming by, and he starts shouting. They try to, shut him up. But what does he have to lose, right? So he shouts even louder. This is my one chance. The guy's walking by. This is my only chance. So Jesus calls him, says, "Bring him to me," and he simply asks one question: "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you?" Bartimaeus says, "My teacher, let me see again." And he heals his sight, saying that your faith has made you well, and tells him to go. Rather than leave, he joins the ranks of those following Jesus to Jerusalem. Interestingly, in this gospel, this is the last thing that Jesus does before he enters Jerusalem, before there's the triumphant entry and Holy Week starts and the temple, all of it. And we're at the beginning of the end of Jesus' mortal life. He gives, as he has always given, without thought for anything in return, and regardless of his own condition or situation. So it's with that backdrop that I have to tell a story. I've learned many lessons from Carrie. One of the most profound, and actually changed my heart, those events that happened that you can remember. It just was a random day in Jacksonville, Florida, at a random intersection on the south side of town. And it may have happened to you as well, this particular thing. It certainly wasn't the first time it had happened to me, and it was the last time, however, that I responded the way that I did, because this moment changed how I would respond from that point to now. We're coming off a highway in Jacksonville. There's highways everywhere in Jacksonville. And we come to a stoplight, and you can turn left on this road. And on the driver's side was a beggar, person with a little sign asking for money. And I don't remember what the sign had written on it. I'm sure it was some variant of, I'm a veteran, I'm homeless, I'm hungry, please help, God bless. The details, I guess, aren't really important. But I had, to that point, a sort of set of defensive mechanisms. One is, as you're sort of approaching the intersection, you hope that there's traffic in front of you so that the person doesn't have time to get back to your car, right? And you don't have to deal with the encounter at all. Or maybe you're lucky enough that the light's green and you can just sail right through. You don't have to deal with them again. But in this particular case, we were right up front, and then you kind of have to go into that sort of, like this. And you look at something interesting over there, or you talk, or you change the radio, anything. I got eye contact anyway, despite my best efforts, and didn't give him anything. And Carrie and I, we went on and started a discussion about me saying like, the guy's just going to use it on drugs, or he's probably got a house somewhere and this is just what he's doing. And here's the moment. Carrie says, I don't know. The way I think about it, this is what this person's life has become. This is what they're left to do in order to try and get money. Imagine what the rest of their day and night must be like, if this is what they're doing in any weather. How much more important is that dollar or two to a person in that state than to us? And there it was. With just a few words, the profundity of giving without concern, giving without thought for any kind of anything back to me, was made clear. And my own selfish protections, the layers of supposition and skepticism made shamefully clear. That kind of giving is naive. It's childlike. It's unsophisticated. It's fleeceable. It's simple-minded. It's unworldly, vulnerable. It's primitive. It invites imposition and exploitation. It invites us to be taken advantage of. It rewards, potentially, dishonesty or addiction. And it's exactly what we're called to do. That's what we're called to do. Jesus does all that he does, all the healing and teaching to provide us an example of how to live with each other, and in the most basic of the few requests he makes of us. Remember, there's only a couple, right? He simply tells us to love one another as he has loved us. Since that day in Jacksonville, I always keep a few dollars in the center console of my vehicle. And where I used to try to time my arrival, to get through or stay back, I'm now the jerk that actually stops the car and gives somebody the money, regardless of whether or not it's convenient. I'd like to think that against all the failings and trespass and inequities that I am, that one small moment is a moment when I feel like I'm doing what I was asked to do. So I'd like to challenge us all, if we get back to God complex, I'd like to challenge us all to have a bit of a God complex, right? Not the narcissistic, volatile, wrathful one that psychoanalysts say is what makes it up. But to redefine it, to just mean that one of all of God's qualities, unthinking giving. Giving without thought of reciprocity or the possibility of a negative outcome. Giving simply for the sake of need in whatever form it takes. Emulation of the simple core of Jesus' message to us is our new God complex. I read over and over again the poem that was for today, and it made me think of one that I encountered a long time ago, 20 years or so. It came to me, it's called On Grace, and it's part of a small study of aspects of Christianity. So it's called On Grace. We are apertures and stuck shutters, poorly oiled, dented, and askew by our own fearful indifference, conduits gummed by the residue of our behavior. The love of God constantly pours into us with the eternal hope that we will open the rusty, ignored chamber, release our selfish grip on the handle of our compassion, and bring focus to our heart's loving lens, so that the warmth flows through us without reduction and spreads to the other shivering souls who inhabit with us this life.